We're going to continue, and we've been in the Gospel of John for, 5 weeks maybe. And we're going to continue in that. So if you want to just kind of mark your place in John chapter 6. A few weeks ago, last week I spoke John 5, and I skipped chapter 4. The reason for that is because 2 weeks before we started kind of our official series in John, I preached in John chapter 4. And I thought maybe I should just repeat the sermon because 2 weeks, you never know who has already forgotten. But I decided not to, so we're going to be in John 6 this morning. When I was in college down in Southern California, there was this conference that they would hold called Catalyst Conference, not at college, but at this kind of mega church down there. And the Catalyst Conference was one of those just kind of yearly church leadership conference where they'd bring in major speakers like Dave Ramsey and Andy Stanley and these really well-known Christian authors. And then they would have concerts. And so John Mark McMillan played at this Catalyst Conference, and the band Gungor. Now, if you don't know who Gungor is, Michael Gungor was a worship leader that really kind of got known during youth conferences called the Choir of the Fire. And then kind of just took that from worship band to more Christian music with some really neat worship stuff. And it was really creative, really unique. And so I remember this concert. It was supposed to be kind of a worship concert, and it was really engaging. I mean, maybe some of the best performing I've ever seen, as well as anointed. And Gungor could draw a crowd, and he could keep a crowd, unlike me. And some of it was anointing. Some of it was he was really entertaining. But the reality is, the truth is, if you can give people what they want, they will stick around. Because here's the thing with Gungor. A few years later, he declared himself an atheist. And he began to deconstruct his faith. It deconstructs just the really popular term for when a Christian begins to question everything and pick it apart until they don't know what they believe and they decide they don't believe anything. Reality is, people that leave their faith typically have some sort of unfulfilled expectation of Jesus, that Jesus doesn't fit into my mold of who God must be, and therefore I don't want to believe or follow him. We can attribute popularity or popular opinion with godliness and Christianity. In other words, if you can continue to give people what they want, regardless of what they need or spiritual growth, but what they want, you can maintain an audience. You can maintain and grow and develop an audience. And from the outside, we look like, wow, they must be doing something right because they're filling seats. Unfortunately, there's a real big difference between an audience being entertained and people being discipled and worshiping Jesus. And on that, by the way, I believe that I saw something a couple years ago, maybe sooner, that Gungor is kind of realizing, maybe I shouldn't have walked away, and I think Jesus is real, but he's real shaky. So, side note. But Jesus could grow an audience. Jesus could be, with some disciples and then have a crowd of people wanting to watch and ultimately be entertained by Jesus, because when you are known for healings and miracles and you're delivering people with demonic possession and you're spitting and making mud and sticking in someone's eyes and all of a sudden they can see, people want to see that. And so people followed Jesus. Some of them really followed him because he was the Son of God and they wanted to engage the life that he brought, but many people followed Jesus, the word says, for the signs he was doing. We talked about that a few weeks ago in John 2 when it says that people trusted Jesus because of the signs and the miracles that he was doing, not because of who he was and is. And then it says Jesus himself did not trust and entrust himself to them. So Jesus could grow an audience. However, unfortunately, you had crowds of people not there because they were being transformed and their hearts were being given to God, but they were there because they wanted entertainment. They wanted to see miracles. I mean, how many of you don't want to see miracles? We all want to. We all want to see some big things, somebody raised from the dead, somebody with broken limbs that have been made whole and strengthened. Jesus wasn't always excited about the crowds, though. In fact, we often see Jesus kind of disappearing from the crowd. So we're going to be in John chapter 6, and here is where Jesus draws his largest crowd that's recorded in Scripture. By the way, this is the only miracle that we're going to see that is recorded in all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They all kind of have different things that they cover, but they all cover this, because this is just mind-boggling. So Jesus has this crowd of people who's coming because they want to see the miracles and the really cool stuff he's doing. And as you are probably well aware, you've got 5,000 men that are recorded, but that's not including all the women and children. So 15 to 20,000 people. That's the size of Sheridan that followed Jesus to this hillside. And Jesus, here's the reality. Jesus, as fast as he grows this crowd, the next day, most of them are going to leave. And Jesus will lose the crowd as fast as he grows it or gains it. So, John chapter 6, a little bit of context here. Herod is king of Israel. Herod has just killed John the Baptist at this time in history. As you know, John the Baptist is Jesus' first cousin. They loved each other. John baptized Jesus. He was declaring, make way for the king. And John has been kind of confronting Herod, like, hey, you probably should not be sleeping with your brother's wife, which, by the way, you probably should not be sleeping with your brother's wife if you are. Don't. Herod's hooking up with his brother's wife. Her daughter on Herod's birthday decides she's going to go and seduce him. She's doing kind of a nasty little dance. Herod goes, hey, anything you want, you got it, sister. And so on behalf of her mom, she says, I want you to kill John the Baptist. I want you to behead him. And he does. So I'm going to read real quick out of Matthew 14, just a little context into where we'll be in John 6. It says, he sent and had John beheaded in the prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. And now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. Okay, so just visualize this scenario real quick. Herod kills John. Herod's disciples go and get John's body, and they go and they tell Jesus, Jesus, we knew that your cousins, that your ministries were connected because John's ministry was for you. He's dead. Jesus, as it says, he goes away to grieve the death of his cousin. He's going away to seek time with the Father. Jesus isn't going with the intent on feeding the 20,000. He's going with the intent of getting away and alone with his Father. And he's been ministering now for quite some time. This could be up to a couple years into his ministry. We don't know exactly. But consistency throughout the Gospels is that we see Jesus sought time with the Father regularly, especially before and after major things happened. Like we see Jesus go into the wilderness and spend alone time recharging with God, especially before something major would happen and after something major would happen. So John chapter 6, that's our context into where we're at. After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a large crowd was following him. Same crowd, Matthew 14, same time, because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. So crowd's not following him because they go, you're the Messiah, you're the Son of God. They're following him because they saw miracles. It's cool. We want to see more of these. They're not looking for transformation. They're not looking to engage Jesus because he's God in the flesh. It's Christmas time. That's that God became man, took on humanity while still maintaining his deity. They're not following Jesus because of that. They're following him because they saw really cool things. They want the miracles. They don't want the miracle worker. It's kind of like this mentality. If I attend church not because I want to grow as a disciple or live a surrendered life to God or give of myself and my time and my money to other people in the kingdom, I attend church because it makes me feel good or it makes me feel inspired or makes me happy, and then I get, one more week to do whatever I want, and then I attend church again. It's this taking mentality. The irony is, or maybe the beauty is, that Jesus knew that they were only after signs and wonders, and Jesus still did signs and wonders. So Jesus knew their intentions in their heart is not that they're after Jesus and him transforming and shaping them into his image. Their intention in their heart is we just want to see miracles. And Jesus, even though he knows those are the wrong intentions, he still has compassion on them and did miracles. Like, it didn't deter him from his compassion and his love for them. Jesus' compassion for you is not based upon the condition of your heart. His compassion and his love for you is not based upon if you're doing things with the right motives or the right reasons. Some of you are probably here for the wrong motives, food. But Jesus' compassion for you is overflowing and he's working in your life. And some of you might encounter the miracles of Jesus and amazing works of God, and your hearts might not change, and he still loves you. And just as he did with Judas, he still washes your feet. So let's continue reading. It says, Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. And remember, he's looking for recharge time with the Father. Now, the Passover, the Feast of the Jews, is at hand. So you have lots of people traveling, lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread wouldn't be enough for each of them to get a little. Okay, the reason Jesus asked Philip's the local. He's the guy that knows all the local bakeries. He's like, okay, I know that we've got Smith's over here in Albertsons, and the Sweetheart Bread Bakery hasn't been open for years. Jesus, there's not enough bread in town, and even if there was, it would take somewhere around $25,000 to $30,000 just to give everyone a bite. We really want to spend all of our collective money for not even one meal. This is pretty amazing, because Philip's been watching Jesus do miracles for a while now. 1-2 years, probably most days. But this wasn't healing a blind man. I think that if Jesus would have said, "How's this guy going to get sight?" Philip would have been like, "Well, I saw you do that last week, Jesus. You can do it." This wasn't making wine for a party like his first miracle. This is roughly 15,000 to 20,000 people. Now, the right answer, because it says Jesus said this to test him, the right answer is what? Jesus, whatever you want to do is going to work. Whatever you want to do is exactly what needs done. But Philip's response in this is, nothing in this situation will work. How like us is Philip? Like, we can see the impossibility, and even though we've seen the faithfulness of Jesus and we've seen him care for other people and work in our lives, and we've seen him provide, we go, nope, nothing's gonna work. I've got this medical debt because we had this emergency room visit, and I just don't have money to pay for it, so I guess now we'll just be poor and die. Like, Jesus, you can't do that because he didn't do that for me already. Like, that's just like you and me. It's like, yeah, Jesus can do it. But back home, we're like, oh no, we're done. But Jesus isn't rattled by our lack of faith. Jesus isn't rattled by Philip's lack of faith. So it says, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they for so many?" Okay, Andrew isn't known for very much in the New Testament, but he's known for one thing: bringing people to Jesus. Andrew was the one that went and got Peter when he was Simon and said, "Hey, we found the Messiah, come meet him." Later on, we're going to see Andrew brings these Greeks who want to meet Jesus to him. Andrew brings this boy. That's about the only thing we know of Andrew, but man, if that would be the only thing I would be known for, I would be great with that. And Andrew here, he's not even necessarily super faith-filled either, because he's like, "Jesus, here's a boy with a Lunchable's worth of food." Like, he's got some crackers and some Kipper snacks, and I don't know how that's going to work with 30,000 people. Maybe you can just have it. Like, you need your energy. But he still chose to bring the boy and his Lunchable to Jesus. And I can just see this kid, like, he's hearing this conversation, and he's like, "Hey, guys, I heard you're hungry. Like, my mom threw this in my backpack. Would you guys like to share my snack?" And Andrew's probably like, "Well, buddy, like, it's not going to feed these people, but let's give it to Jesus." And the humanity in you and I can look at individuals and see what they have and what they don't have, and in our minds go, it's probably not enough. We can look at people and think like, well, you got something, but like your personality is way off to do anything real great. We can look at people and say like, well, maybe, but you live in Rosette. Like, who are you going to influence out there? Like it's easy for us to begin to see more than what people have. It's easy for us to begin to see what people don't have and then to assume what the influence of God on their life can look like. Now, this kid is unnamed. He's unknown. There's nothing else about him in all of Scripture and all of recorded history, but he's not insignificant because this whole miracle is based upon what he brought to the equation, what he brought to Jesus. So here's this boy, and he's got enough for a kid to eat something. And Jesus goes, have people sit down. We're going to feast. He said, have people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves. When he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. I like John's repetition here. Jesus says, have people sit down. The disciples have people sit down. And then Jesus feeds those who are seated. We're going to talk about it in a second. So also the fish as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, gather the leftover fragments that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who'd eaten. We get this command from Jesus to the disciples. He says, guys, we got what we need. Go tell people to sit down. There's a command to the disciples for Jesus to work through them. We want God to work through us, but we often aren't listening to what he's saying. We are quick to act when there's a situation in front of us and we go, okay, God, this needs a divine intervention. Only you can make this happen, so here I go. Sometimes we just kind of need to stop real quick and just go, Jesus, what do you need me to do? Because we can get into Christian rhythms and routines, and here are the things I say, and here are the things I do, and then we miss out on power when Jesus is saying, I'm actually not quick to act, but I've got something stirring over here. Jesus did what he saw the Father doing. He didn't just go and make stuff up. And if you want to give out what Jesus is giving out, then you have to obey Jesus. Jesus says, I'm going to give out through you disciples, go have them sit down. So there's this command for them to obey. Then there's this command from the disciples to those who'd received the miracle. It says they sat down. If you want to eat, you got to sit. And if you want to receive what Jesus is giving out to you, you have to surrender. Okay, if you want to give what Jesus is giving out, you have to obey. And then if you want to receive what Jesus is giving out, you've got to surrender. Okay. I don't feel like sitting down, but I will. Like, if that's what you want. And then there's this receiving of the miracle following the surrender, but it doesn't say he fed everyone. He says he fed those who were seated. That if you want to enjoy and savor that which was given to you, you have to receive it. I believe that you can surrender, but yet not receive. Kind of this, like, okay, Jesus, I'm here, but we're so fixated and focused on everything else that he's like holding out to us. Here's some bread and fish for you to eat. And they enjoyed it, and they had to receive, to savor that which God would give them. And Jesus wants you to savor him and enjoy him, but he doesn't force feed you. He offers you his life. In fact, the end of this chapter, which we're not going to get in much, he says to this crowd, like, if you want to be a part of me, you have to eat and drink my flesh and my blood, but he's not going to force feed you his life. You have to receive it. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. Like, we came here for a sign, and Jesus just took a couple of small fish and a few crackers, and he fed us all. So, like, obviously there's something substantial. This is him. This is the prophet. So perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force, make him king, Jesus withdrew again. He didn't stay and entertain the crowd. They wanted Jesus to be king so they could defeat Rome, so they could become the world power. They wanted Jesus to be king for their own gain. They didn't want Jesus to be king because he was God in flesh. They assumed that since Jesus was doing miracles, he could successfully lead an army to victory against the Roman powers that be. But that was it. And as we said, the next day, most of them will stop following Jesus, as he would teach them that he is best, and as he would teach them that they need to partake in his life, and that the miracles are way down the list compared to the life of Jesus. They go, we don't want that. This is not what we're after. We're after somebody who can do something miraculous and powerful, so that way we can get what we want. We're not interested in partaking of your life. One day they want him as king. The next day they abandon him because he didn't offer what they wanted. He offered what they really needed. Man, and I find myself so often like these people. That just like, Jesus, your purpose is to serve me, and it's to fill me up. That's what he said. You're not here because of anything else. You're here because you ate. You ate a bunch of food that you saw miraculously be divided up. And I find myself in this boat of, Jesus, like, I'm here because you fed me once and I want to be fed again. Jesus is saying that's so far down the list. If you want to be here because you're partaking in my life. Like, engage with the life of Jesus. As he would say, eat my body, drink my blood, take up your cross, follow me. I believe that it's important that we would answer this. If Jesus only offered you forgiveness of sins because of the cross, he didn't offer you healings and provisions and relationship and purpose and empowerment and so forth that he does actually offer us. But if none of that was on the table, if all he offered us was salvation from the cross, would that be enough for you to follow him? Like, God is so good, that's not all he offers us, but if that was it, would that be enough? Because when he says that to the crowds, they go, no. And he looks at the disciples and he said, what about you guys? You guys want to go anywhere? The 12? And they're like, we don't have anywhere to go. You have the words of life. If Jesus came and he said, I don't have anything for your finances, for your family, but I've got forgiveness. My prayer is that we go, man, that's enough to follow you and to partake of your life. We're going to continue on. It says, when evening came, so Jesus has fled from the crowds. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea. They got into a boat, and they started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. And the sea became rough because it was a strong wind blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. And they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Now, the Sea of Galilee, which is the sea, is below sea level, and it's actually kind of, you go from the Mediterranean through valleys that make themselves down to the Sea of Galilee, and it creates this wind tunnel, almost like a carburetor that just pressurizes air. And so, yeah, the Sea of Galilee wasn't like this huge body of water, but it would get these just massive storms and massive winds that would just destroy boats. And so, Jesus is kind of looking for this alone time again. And Matthew actually says that he forces his disciples to get into the boat and head to the other side. And Jesus goes and spends time alone with the Father. So this is interesting. Jesus forces his disciples, I need you guys to go now. Go get in the boat, head across. An hour later, the winds pick up. Several hours later, they are in the midst of a storm that absolutely could kill them. Jesus has been up praying, and here he comes walking on the water. Now, I find it very interesting that Jesus made them get into the boat. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is that Jesus needed alone time with the Father. It's like I'm trying to grieve the death of my cousin, and every opportunity that I think I have to go and pray, here's an opportunity to serve others, but I need this recharge, this filling of my cup from alone time with the Father. So it's like, guys, you got to go. All ministry and Christ influence is an overflow of your relationship with God. Jesus prioritized his time with the Father, and it usually didn't land on a Sabbath, but often proceeded public ministry, which means that your time with the Father does not equal church. Your time with the Father equals consistent filling of your cup at all times that you can pour it back out. The more time you spend alone with God, the more you will be able to minister to other people. Anyone can be inspiring. Inspirational speakers, motivational speakers, it's a high-paying gig across the United States amongst the secular community. But ministry to people and influence for the kingdom of God comes out of relational abundance with God. That if your time with the Father is few and far between and scarce, then the best that you can hope for is, well, I kind of remember this working once. But if your time with the Father is abundant and it fills you, then that pours out to those around you. So Jesus, I believe he made him get in the boat. One, because it's like, guys, I need to be away from you so I can spend alone time with God. But two, I think Jesus actually wanted his disciples to face a storm. And we don't like storms, and so we don't want to think that Jesus could send us into a storm. Jesus sent them into a storm. He made them get in the boat. He could have been like, hey, guys, why don't you hang out down here on the shore for the next few hours while I go and pray? And instead, he says, get in the boat and row. And then he comes up in the thick of it. Like, he knew the storm was coming, but he sent them into it. I think that's because storms aren't always bad things. They can be a result of painful and bad circumstances. And so I don't think that necessarily every time it's God making the storm, but I absolutely think God will send you into a storm that he sees coming because he is working for your good and your growth. God has not desired and designed this eager, meek, easy, luxury living life for you so that way you can just hang on to that until you die. God is molding and shaping you into the image of his Son, and that comes through stretching and challenges and trials and tribulations that Romans 5 says result in hope. So if you want hope, and if you want to be shaped into the image of Jesus, it's not going to come easily. But God's faithful. You know, Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 11, he says, whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I'm speaking as a fool, because I also dare to boast of that. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they offspring of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm an even better one. I'm talking like a madman. This is 2 Corinthians 11. I didn't put this up. But he says, by far greater labors, more imprisonments, countless beatings, near death. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A day and a night I was adrift at sea on frequent journeys in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my own people, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers at sea, dangers from false brothers, in toil and hardship through many sleepless nights, hungry, thirsty, without food, cold, and exposure. Does this sound fun or what? But in the next chapter, Paul says, I boast in my weaknesses. Because God says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. God isn't the cause of all your pain. I don't think that God is making bad things happen. I think that God sees the bad things, though, and he sends you into the storm knowing it's going to grow you in Christ and it will glorify his name. And that you will be in a situation where God will say to you, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. And your inability, I am able. So God sends them into the storm. And it says when they had rowed for 3 or 4 miles. Matthew says this was the 4th watch of the night. So they've been rowing for 6 to 8 hours against this storm. How many of you just love exercise? Like, you don't love that exercise. Like this, if we don't make it, we are dead. But here's the really interesting thing. So it says that they rode for 3 or 4 miles. The storm is literally going to kill them. Jesus is walking on the water, and he gets in the boat with them, and immediately they are at land. Here's kind of the funny thing that we don't realize because we don't live in Israel. It says they rode for 3 or 4 miles. The Sea of Galilee is only 3 or 4 miles across. So like they were literally there and had no idea. They literally have made it to the end of the sea, to Capernaum. They're about to be there, but they can't see anything but the storm in front of them. And Jesus shows up. And he gets in the boat. And immediately they're there. In other words, Jesus got in the boat with them. He got with them in their situation, and they were able to see, we did this. We made this through. Now, Jesus never questioned. He knew they were going to make it through. And some of you are in really big storms. Some of you are in messes. Some of you made that mess yourself, and some of you didn't. And you're wondering, am I even going to get through this? Because I feel exhausted trying to row my way through this storm, and I don't know if I'm going to ever get there. I think that some of you are on the very final stretch of the storm. You just can't see land yet. The last thing that the disciples expected after a day of watching Jesus feed the multitudes with this amazing miracle that our minds really can't comprehend how that even looks, the last thing they expected was for Jesus to send them into a storm. And they have to remember, Jesus made them get into the boat. And now here's a storm. And you've got to remember that God brings you at times into storms, and he makes you get into the boat. But that storm didn't last forever, and neither will yours. Storms are seasonal. They're not perpetual. And God knows the seasons of your life and when that deliverance should come. I want to end with this. I'm going to end early so we can get on with eating. So that's why you're here today. But it doesn't say Jesus created the storm. It does say Jesus sent him into it. You can trust that every intention God has for you is good, and it's for your benefit. As Romans 8 would say, that God works everything together for the good of those who love him. And then the next verse says that those he knew, he predestined to be shaped into the image of Jesus. That God is using every situation, if you will stay surrendered, say, Jesus, you have my life. He's using those situations for your good, and that good means looking like Jesus. That good means that I talk more like Jesus. When I see the Father moving, I move. When I hear him speaking, I speak. So maybe we can reapproach the storms in our life as, God, what are you doing in this storm? How have you been working? Maybe we can reapproach the storms in our life even with a heart of thanksgiving. Romans 5 says we rejoice in our sufferings because suffering produces endurance, which produces a proven character that gives us hope. So maybe we can begin to look and change our perspective on our circumstances around us to say, God, you are sovereign over it all. Your intentions are good. And there's a benefit for me on the other side of the storm. And you might be just about there if you would invite Jesus into your boat. It says that they were happy to welcome him in. I don't think Jesus forced his way onto the boat. They were like, Jesus, please get in the boat with us. And would you invite Jesus into your boat that you could begin to see with a good perspective what's going on around you, that you might be at the other end of this storm? Would you pray with me?